Time for a career change? Then it's time to contact Edinburgh Trams. With our extended network opening soon, it's an exciting time to jump on board and join us. We have full and part-time roles available with lots of great benefits and salaries of up to £23,000 a year. You'll also enjoy training and excellent career opportunities in a multicultural and diverse work environment. Edinburgh Trams. How far could you go? View our latest vacancies at careers.edinburghtrams.com.
Reese's peanut butter cups are the greatest, but let me play devil's advocate here. Let's see. So, no, that's a good thing. That's definitely not a problem. Reese's, you did it. You stumped this charming devil.
So you want to marry my daughter?
Yes, I did.
So do you hang out in the hood all the time, or do you just come up here for our food and women?
This January.
Your family, my family. I don't know how this is going to work.
I like your braids.
Thank you.
Exhibit had braids.
Jonah Hill, Lauren London, David Duchovny, Nia Long, with Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Eddie Murphy.
What's up with white cuz? Am I white cuz?
Well, I'm not.
You People, directed by Kenya Barris. Rated R. Now streaming only on Netflix.
Novak Djokovic is the 10-time Australian Open champion. He's a 22-time Grand Slam champion. He's won 28 straight matches at Melbourne Park. The statistics, I could go on. Aryna Sabalenka is the Australian Open champion as well, and we'll talk about all of that and more here on Tennis Unfiltered.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
I'm James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. I've got tennis writer George Bellshaw and our resident tennis coach Calvin Betton here. I think this is the first time all three of us have actually managed to find the same window in our schedules for a while, so we are a threesome once again. George, how much have you enjoyed having the Australian Open in your mornings to distract you from your actual job?
Yeah, it's been very good. It wasn't just my mornings, James. I mean, sometimes Andy Murray was still going to about 5 o'clock here, so it was actually my full work day. He was vaguely distracting me. But yeah, no, it's. I don't know how I'd reflect on this tournament as a whole. Not that you're asking me that question, but it's been a bit of a. I've enjoyed parts of it, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily been, particularly the men's side, not been the most memorable one, or one that will live long in the memory, even if there's quite a lot of interesting context, I think, that spawned off the tournament.
Yeah, it's not been necessarily from a tennis perspective a thriller. Calvin, in terms of your sleep-deprived schedules that you often have to keep with players all over the world, how does the Australian Open rank?
Well, after Henry and Julian had lost, I actually got back on a normal British time span for about 8 days until I then fly off to Dallas.
Very good. Yes, you're doing a little American tour with Henry and Jules. Is that right?
Yeah, 2 weeks. We're going Dallas and Delray Beach. So yeah.
Are they 250s or 500s?
They are 250s. And it'll actually be the first time I've ever worked in America.
Yeah. It's exciting.
I've been to America many times, but I've never actually been on work. I've been with tennis because I went to university there, but I've never actually worked as a tennis coach in America. So,
I'm hoping we'll get a good snap of you with like a cowboy hat and some nice kind of.
Well, it's funny you say that.
Desert Calvin.
I actually do have a proper leather cowboy hat, and I would love to take it, but I don't think it. I think I might struggle to get it in a case or anything, and I'm not wearing it on the flight and everything.
on the flight. 100%. Instagram content.
Only way to get the hat there. Please leave us a comment on Twitter if you want to see a picture of Calvin wearing his cowboy hat on the plane. It's Unfiltered Tennis, our handle.
It's actually I got it one year at Glastonbury, and I'd been eyeing it up for a couple of days, and then one day I'd had quite a few beers, and I woke up with the hat. So I've obviously purchased it at some stage.
Well, you hope you've purchased it
during the night, yeah. But yeah, it's been with me ever since. I haven't worn it much since then. So if there's ever a time, it might be in Dallas.
It's like an American turning up to Edinburgh and wearing a kilt, right? Like it's the most touristy thing. I don't know, George.
How about we could bargain with our listeners and say if we get 5-star reviews before you go on Friday, you have to wear a cowboy hat.
And the reviews have to mention the hat.
Well, they're going to include the cowboy emoji. How about that?
Even better, yeah, absolutely. 5-star reviews by Friday. That's all you have to do, and you have to include the cowboy hat emoji. Right, moving on, because actually there is quite a lot of tennis to talk about in this Australian Open review podcast. As I mentioned, Novak Djokovic is the 22-time Grand Slam champion now. Aryna Sabalenka is a 1-time Grand Slam champion. I thought we probably should start with the Djokovic-Tsitsipas final because it'll be freshest in our memories. George, not a classic, I would suggest.
I've been thinking about this final quite a lot, and I think the context ruined the match. That's the theory I'm positing. As in, I think the match itself was kind of fine. Like the second and third sets were tight. There were lots of quite interesting moments where I think if you weren't watching it through the lens of knowing it's Novak Djokovic and Stefanos Tsitsipas on one side of the net, you'd actually really have enjoyed it. Like had it been a young British hotshot playing their first Grand Slam final, I think we'd have come away being like, ooh, did really, really well, pushed one of the greats of all time, made it really close. But because it's Tsitsipas, and we've seen it so many times before, you just never felt like he was going to win. And kind of similarly, like in the women's final, that felt like a really tense, interesting watch because we've never seen these two in like such a big stage playing each other that you kind of couldn't take your eyes off it. You weren't really sure who was mentally going to go. But because Novak, it just feels so kind of imperious against the whole field when it's not Alcaraz at the minute, I suppose, that there's just a real inevitability that kind of, I don't want to say ruined the match for me, but there was never a point, even when Tsitsipas had set point, I didn't believe he was going to win that set. There was just no moment I thought, yeah, I really fancy anything other than a Djokovic straight sets win, which is a shame because they were two quite tight, interesting sets if you stripped it back of this being Djokovic.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I thought the level wasn't super high. I think the first set, Djokovic played pretty well, and unlike a lot of his matches in this tournament, he was actually very calm in the first set and he kept it pretty together because he has often been quite stressed throughout this tournament for various reasons. Obviously, the hamstring has been bothering him and that's in his head a lot, I think. But he was very composed in that first set. And then when it got heated, I think it was the game at 3-3 when it was quite tight and 30-all and the crowd started getting into it and Tsitsipas started revving the crowd up, and then Djokovic started really talking to his box and shouting at Goran Ivanisevic and looked really stressed. And I thought, well, we might have a match here. But then that's that set point, Calvin. I mean, we talked about it at the time. The set point at 4-5, I hesitate to say Tsitsipas bottled it, but that's a lot what it looked like.
Yeah, you do bottle it. I've said before that, but I think choking or bottling is when you're living somewhere between fear and hope, and that was it. That exemplified it in that he was too fearful to go. He went down the middle on every single shot. He didn't go within about 1.5 meters of either sideline. He was fearful of missing it, and he was just hoping that Djokovic was going to miss. And if you're hoping that Djokovic is going to miss in a pressure point, you'll be hoping for a long time.
Yeah, and it wasn't just that one point. It was every time he got to 15-30, every time he faced a second serve where it felt like, go on, get after it. Put yourself in a better position. He just felt like he just played it safe. And as Calvin says, there's no one you'd have play a tennis point for your life in that sort of position more than Novak Djokovic, I don't think. I mean, you just fancy him on every big point, and so it proved again.
I think we said that, or George, you might have said it, that 15-30 is clearly Tsitsipas's least favourite score because that was definitely a point that he played really poorly when receiving in that match. And I'm trying to find in my notes the specific point, but he had a second serve, 15-30. He ran around it to hit the forehand and then didn't tee off on it. Like, he did everything right. It was a short second serve. Djokovic's second serve has not been very good in this tournament, and it wasn't very good in the final. And he ran around it, and I thought, here we go. He's just going to absolutely leather this. And he just didn't. Like, whether he didn't strike it very well or whether he just didn't believe in himself, I don't know. And I think overall, talking about passivity and Calvin's phrase about being somewhere between fear and hope, I think Stefanos Tsitsipas believed in himself too much. I think he believed that he was good enough to outgrind Novak Djokovic from the baseline. I think he thought, my ball striking is good enough, my physicality is good enough, my resilience is good enough. And I don't think that's true.
I disagree there. I don't think he did. I think he had no belief, and I think that's what tends to happen when people have no belief. He went for the safest option. He thought, I'm not going to lose this final. The best way, the only chance he had with winning was to go out there and swing, and hope that he gets in, hope that he serves well and he gets enough forehands after his serve that he can hit them. But he went for that way, I think, James, because I think he just thought this is the safest way, and he won't have lost the final. You got to remember as well, he doesn't have, although he's made the final, it's a strange one, and he's had a couple of these. Tsitsipas actually, that he's actually not been in any great sort of form now for a while. He pretty much cruised, beating players who you would think he would beat most of the time, and then he beat Sinner, who you think, and even Sinner, to be fair, is in the majors is untested, or not unproven, should I say? So it's not like he came in there into the final thinking, I'm playing great here, I can really bring my best game. I don't think he was overly confident, even though he was in the final.
I have found. Sorry, George. Before you go, I have found the point I was talking about, and it was 1-2 second set, 15-30. If people want to go back and look at it, and I should also point out that Tsitsipas had 15-30 on the Djokovic serve 3 times in that set. Only once did he find a break point, and that was a 30-40 break point. And as discussed, he failed to convert it. Sorry, George.
I was just saying. I mean, I think the frustrating thing for Tsitsipas is as well that he definitely does have the weapons to attack Djokovic. I'm not saying I think he's got the game that's better than Djokovic's, but he does have shots that, he can hit big winners off both sides when he catches it well. We talk about the backhand not being the most robust shot, but there were some absolutely fabulous backhand down the line winners that he did come up with in kind of non-pressure moments. And it's just that kind of that frustration. You think you've just said he's had 3, 15, 30 points in that set, and he played every one the same way, and it was the wrong approach. He'd have had a better chance just actually trying to twat the return, and one of them might have gone in, and he might have won got an easy kind of forehand put away or something. I'm not saying he necessarily would, but he had as much chance winning it by completely going for it than he would against Djokovic, who's going to win that type of point 95 times out of 100.
I think also Djokovic served very well. I mean, his second serve wasn't great, but tactically he served very well. We've seen him do that before. I think you'll remember, George, maybe watching the Berrettini match, or maybe we were talking about the Berrettini match at Wimbledon, the final, where he was just softballing the second serve into Berrettini's backhand and saying, go on, hit that. And against Tsitsipas, and I don't have the stats to back this up, but I noticed a lot, he would hit the kick serve into Tsitsipas's backhand on second serve out wide, and Tsitsipas just had nothing. I mean, honestly, the noise his backhand makes off the racket is different. Like, not just that he doesn't hit it as well and flies it long more often and misses it more, but it genuinely makes a different noise.
I actually felt like I was kind of playing that match as Tsitsipas, because if I was playing against me, I would do the exact same thing. Just keep rolling it into that backhand. And, it was like, at times, it was just like a club match, though. Like when, you're taught as a young player, always just go into the backhand. It's almost certain to be kind of weaker. Just keep playing into that. And Djokovic, every big point, just did that. And he didn't do necessarily masses with the ball, as you say, James. There's a good roll into the backhand and then just controlling into it, knowing this guy is only going to hurt you 1 in 10 when he comes up with this magic backhand down the line, which, straight afterwards, Tsitsipas will give it the big fist pump, like, yeah, look at me, I'm amazing. But the reality is, Novak's playing the percentages every single time against this guy, and he knows he's going to win the majority of big points. And that's why you never felt he was going to win this match, because really, when Djokovic could be bothered, he could just turn it on and roll it into this guy's backhand and kind of have that, what I call the club player simple strategy.
42 unforced errors Stefanos Tsitsipas made in that match, which is pretty staggering, I think, and certainly very rarely are you going to win a final. And I know Djokovic forces errors out of you, but this is technically unforced errors, and that, yeah, a lot of them came on the forehand. I know we talk a lot about the backhand, but a lot of them did come on the forehand, to be fair. And that is just kind of a product of playing Novak Djokovic. Calvin, I want to ask you something technical. Jim Courier mentioned on commentary that to fix the Tsitsipas backhand, he might need to go through a grip change. And I wondered, and he mentioned how difficult that can be to do at this point in someone's career. I mean, is that something that you've looked at and thought maybe that's what it needs to do? And can you just talk about how difficult that is and why it might be needed?
I don't think he's got a pretty standard backhand grip. I don't think that's the problem. The swing is he hits his one-handed backhand with a bent arm, which you just can't really do. If you look at all the great one-handed backhand, you'll see, it's hard to explain without seeing it, that there's a full extension of the arm when they hit it, whereas Tsitsipas is always kind of bent at the elbow a little bit. And that's why you never get a full release of power, other than when he's got loads of time and he can just rake one down the line, which he does occasionally. And then, because I mention his backhand so often on this pod, whenever he hits a backhand line winner, then somebody will message me on Twitter going, "Oh, I thought Tsitsipas' backhand was rubbish. Just hit 2 backhand winners in 5 hours, so it can't be that rubbish, can it?" Yeah, in terms of I don't think he does need a grip change, but I can tell you absolute certainty now he won't be changing his grip. You can't be changing your grip as a professional tennis player. I can't think of any instance where an extreme or even bordering extreme grip change on a backhand has happened on a player over the age of about 14 and they've actually recovered from it. Because the problem is it then gets into a mental thing where they if you change your grip, you're then looking at probably at least about 3 months where you're just not making a shot. The ball's flying out everywhere. And then you lose all belief in your shot anyway. And that it's just, there's not a chance he'll be changing his grip on his backhand. I can tell you that now.
I'd still also say he could definitely do a lot better with a slice backhand as well. I think he really...
Yeah, he doesn't hit it very regularly, does he? Yeah, he doesn't, even on defense and attack. You look at for example, you look at Dan Evans, who mainly hits a slice, and Evo has a nice drive, but I'd say he probably doesn't actually hit his drive any hard. He doesn't hit it probably as hard as Tsitsipas does, but Evo uses his slice a lot, and Tsitsipas, for all I give him a bit of stick because his backhand is crap and he's a bit of a weirdo, but he is a very, very talented tennis player, and you don't see that very often from him. You don't see him using his touch and his feel as often as he can. And a couple of times yesterday, he hit a slice, and I thought, that's a really tasty slice he's hit there. And what he has with his slice, he can vary up. He can do the floater. He can do the one where he gets a bit more behind it and hits almost a drive slice. But he seems to almost be trying to prove to himself that he's looking to that he has got a good drive backhand.
Yeah, and I thought the slice was effective when he used it as well. Djokovic isn't perfect. He's not far off. But I felt like when Tsitsipas asked him to put the pace on the ball, especially off the forehand wing, it worked quite well. Whereas, obviously, when there's pace already on it, Djokovic is the best in the world, possibly the best ever, at getting across, getting himself set or slid, and then firing it back with interest.
Yeah. This may be a bit of a niche theory on this, but I do wonder if Tsitsipas's reluctance to use the slice is somewhat like a product of growing up watching Federer a lot. I kind of like Federer had an amazing slice, but was often kind of criticized as, the turning point in his career. Sorry, rather than criticized, the turning point in his career is in the latter stages where he started beating Nadal, were when people were saying he would take on that drive earlier. He really started going after that. And I just wonder if someone who's kind of grown up watching that Federer Nadal match where the slice maybe wasn't as effective against, his biggest rival, a guy who played so many times, whether that's kind of factored into someone watching him where he now thinks, I have to take it on. I can take it on. Federer proved I could beat Nadal by doing that. Why can't I do that?
I think and I don't mean to do monger here about Tsitsipas. I think, and again, this is just sort of having watched tennis for all the years that I have, you don't see many players at this age and at this stage of their career who greatly improve a shot. I think this is kind of what it is. That his backhand is now what it is and what it's going to be. If he does improve it, he might improve it 2 or 3%. Don't get players
Federer's backhand?
No, he just started going for it more though, James. He was hitting slices. He didn't actually improve his drive. He just started hitting the drive more. It wasn't that his backhand drive was any better than what it was before. I think that was absolutely a tactical thing with him. But you don't see players who come out and you go, I tell you what, that player has improved that shot by 20%. And that's what he kind of need to have to do. And what he may do is he may get more from his serve and his forehand.
Yeah, and I think that's, I talked to Mike Philippoussis a bit before the final and just talking about Tsitsipas's game, and I was like, well, he seems to really come under the radar because he kind of did. Like, he didn't really play any classic matches. He didn't really get pushed that much. He just kind of did his business. And I said, it's kind of. He's like, yeah, well, he's got a great serve, and he looks for the forehand, and that's pretty effective when you do it well. And I actually hadn't really thought. I mean, we all know what Tsitsipas's game is about, but I hadn't quite thought about it in those terms. And that's absolutely what he has. And you can see that when that serve is firing and when the forehand is firing, he's got a great game. My concern is he doesn't ever look like he's going to beat Djokovic, Nadal. I mean, I've struggled to put anyone else in that bracket. And Tsitsipas will probably win a major when one of those two isn't in the final. But I think he might always get thrown at him, you never beat, you lost your first 2 finals to Djokovic, and then he retired or got injured or stopped playing, and then you started winning majors. I think we might always say that about Stefanos Tsitsipas. I can just feel it. Sorry, George.
I was just going to say, I know we quite often have this chat about people, and I'd be interested to hear the chat about Djokovic after this, because I think this is arguably the most interesting thing that's come from this final, is where it leaves Djokovic in kind of the long term. But, Tsitsipas, I really struggle to see more than 2 slams coming his way as an absolute max, and I really wouldn't be surprised if it's 0, to be honest. Like, I still worry for him quite a lot.
Yeah, I'm minded to think the same. I could see him winning a slam where basically, I guess kind of like this slam where the draw opens up, but there's no Djokovic at the other side of it. And he might end up, say he might have ended up getting Tommy Paul in the final.
Yeah.
Or something like that. I could see him winning 1 or 2 of those. I don't see, Alcaraz has always gave him a good hiding. Like that's an even worse matchup for him than Djokovic's, because Alcaraz hits the ball harder than Djokovic, and he doesn't miss. So he's not gonna. I don't see him beating Alcaraz in any finals or anything. So yeah, I do think he probably will win one, just because the rest of his game against the majority of players when it gets down to the latter stages is pretty good. And Djokovic isn't going to be around when he's. How old is Tsitsipas now? Is he 23, 24?
24.
Yeah, so in theory, you'd say a tennis player probably doesn't reach the peak while they're 28. You think Djokovic's not going to be this version of Djokovic, I think, as we'll discuss in a minute, in 4 years' time.
You're right, George, that maybe the most interesting thing about this final and the result of it is where does it leave Novak Djokovic? As I mentioned, he's level with Rafa Nadal now on 22. He said afterwards that All he wants to do is win as many Grand Slams as possible. I very briefly thought he was ramping up to a mic drop retirement in his post-match speech, because he said, and this is the thing I really want to say, and it's really important that I say this, and it's something I've thought about a lot, and I was just like, oh my God, no, surely he's not. Anyway, he told everyone to dream big and stuff, which is very nice and very inspirational. Like, it was a nice thing to say, but just I very briefly thought he might be Nico Rosberging. Anyway, what we've seen from Novak Djokovic in this Grand Slam is one of his best performances overall. He called it one of his top, or he said it was his best victory ever at one point. Then he said it was, number 2 or number 3 maybe, but one of his best. He's obviously been through a lot of turmoil with the injury and everything over the last 3 weeks, I suppose it would be. Goran Ivanisevic said 97% of players would have pulled out with that injury. What it did mean is that Djokovic played a totally different, well, not totally different, but I thought he played extremely aggressively. As I mentioned on previous podcasts, he hit the ball harder than I've ever seen him hit the ball, just in a kind of objective. I haven't got the stats to back that up. I may be able to get hold of them, but he battered it as far as I could tell. What now, George? Do you think that we might see Djokovic go, oh, actually, I can win matches in 2 hours 10 rather than 2 hours 40, and that'd be quite handy for my later career? And, he might do what we've said that Andy Murray should be doing all this time.
I mean, it's funny. I've seen Djokovic win lots of matches over the years where he's just kind of come on the court, and they quite often happened in Australia. Which, before we came on the pod, we were talking a little bit about like which slams I really fancy Djokovic to win. And there is just something about that court in Australia with Rod Laver where he does just step up. Like, he gave Nadal an absolute hiding there in 2019. I mean, I've never seen someone just put the ball in the corner with pace as often as he did. I mean, it was just brutal against someone who had played a really good tournament up to that point. So I wouldn't say I'd necessarily expect him to kind of have a big change of style, because he does kind of have some of these matches in his locker, and he is, I don't know. I mean, he's just a weird bloke, isn't he? Like, I do just watch him sometimes play matches, and I'm thinking, like, you definitely could be winning this much easier than you actually are. I know you're still going to win this, but it's almost like, I don't know. It feels weird to say that about someone who's clearly like really competitive, and it is hard to win at this level. But he does just feel so in control of a lot of these matches, and then at other times, just like the only way he's going to lose is by some sort of weird self implosion where he's trying to almost overthink everything and kind of loses his head mentally. And I think that probably speaks volumes to his reaction at the end of the match. I mean, I know he sort of said, there's been things going on for the last 5 weeks that only me and my team know about, and maybe there's something else we're not all aware of. And, there is a bit of context, as we spoke about last week, me and Calvin, like about, what happened last year and coming back, the redemption arc, etc. But that was bizarre. I mean, that was genuinely mental, that kind of reaction at the end. Like, really, it was just over the top, wasn't it? I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, a guy who's won so many championships, it didn't feel that significant to me. But maybe I'm an old cynic.
Well, let's also add in the context of what happened with his father on Wednesday night. For people who've not been following this story, just to kind of put it in context, there was quite a stramash after the Djokovic-Rublev match on Wednesday in the quarterfinals, where 4 or 5. Well, I hesitate to use the word protesters, but 4 or 5 people turned up with Russian flags, Donetsk People's Republic flags, which is the flag that's been co-opted upon the part of Ukraine, one of the parts of Ukraine that Russia has annexed, various other separatist flags, one Russian flag with a huge picture of Vladimir Putin's face on it. They then stood on the steps of the Rod Laver Arena and sung Vladimir Putin's name. They sang the chant Serbia, Russia, and recorded various video messages to pro-Putin leaders. And it was all pretty unsavoury. Eventually, security intervened and evicted them. The police evicted them. By the way, Tennis Australia haven't banned them, so that they can just buy tickets for the Australian Open again and again and again if they want. Apparently, that's something you can do. But what emerged about 24 hours later is a video of Jordan, Novak's father, posing with them, and as he walked away, telling them "Živeli Rusi," which is a disputed version of events. But if you watch the footage, I'm pretty sure you'll hear what I hear and what all of the language experts that all various journalists have spoken to hear, and not what Novak says happened, I'm afraid. But as I say, it's a disputed version of events, and I don't think anyone can be sure of what was said. Either way, it obviously became a huge story, and Jordan chose not to attend the semi-final. He didn't sit in the box for the final, although he was on site watching somewhere else. And Novak said that really affected him. You know, it's quite rare that he has his parents in Australia. I think it might be the first time, although I haven't checked that. But he has certainly talked about how it's rare that they are down in Australia because it's a long way to come. So I kind of understand the great outpouring of emotion. It was unusual, to say the least. But you have to remember, Novak's an unusual guy, like, to say the least. If he was just a bloke, if he wasn't like a world-class tennis player, and he walked into the pub, and you didn't know who he was, and your mate knew who he was, and you're like, oh, who's that guy? And they'd be like, oh, don't look over, he'll come and talk to us. Honestly, he'll try and sell you something. Like, that's the kind of bloke that he is. And if he wasn't a world-class tennis player, you'd just be trying to avoid him quite a lot.
I have to say, like, I kind of I disagree with that a little bit. Whenever I've kind of seen him off camera and had a few conversations with him, he's very charming and normal, actually, in his kind of day-to-day life. But like the more,
yeah, but he would try and sell you some purified mushroom
like hippie
cream.
juice, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, he hasn't done that previously, and you know he's had very normal kind of what I would describe as laddish conversation. Whatever I've kind of crossed him, but I won't go too much into details. But
he's got opinions on women. Excellent.
But I think like the more and more we enter this, I don't know what phase of his career we call this, but definitely the weirdest kind of vax phase or whatever. There are just weirder. No,
surely the bit where he sacked all his coaches.
The tree hugging.
Yeah.
That was weird as well.
2016-17.
Not even close. Not even close.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. It is but I suppose, you know, I'm thinking like the Medvedev kind of crying during that final. The outburst here. I like, even in that weird hippie phase, it didn't feel like it was coming that much into kind of mental moments at like big moments of matches. It was like he just went weird and crap because he decided he wasn't this kind of killing robot winning machine and instead wanted to go and hug trees. So I'm not saying that's not a kind of a weird shift of personality, but actually the weirder moments on the court for me have come in this era, which, you know, there has been a lot going on and he has become a more public villain than back then, I guess, if you like. Villain will probably have some crocodiles on me, but there's certainly more spotlight on him now than there was back then.
You absolutely won't get criticised by crocodiles for that. I think they would absolutely agree with that. They think that Novak has been portrayed as a villain. And in Australia especially, he has been by large parts of the media, albeit less so now. And actually, much of that sentiment faded 6 months ago. But, you know, once a narrative has been established and once a party feels wronged by a narrative, then it's quite hard to kind of eradicate that narrative. But anyway, yes, I think his emotions are much more on the surface now. And I think that's, like, for whatever reason, they are right there, just below quite a fragile exterior. And you saw that with him screaming at his box a lot this tournament and being very animated with them. For whatever reason. And it may well be, I'm always hesitant when people say, oh, you know, only my team know what I've been through. Like, does that mean there's other actual stuff going on that no one knows about? Or does it just mean only they know how much it's affected me? So, you know, it's quite hard to speculate on that front, but I'm just pointing it out. What next for Novak Djokovic is the real question here. In a kind of very practical sense, he will head home to Serbia, I would assume, and then, I say home, he doesn't live there, but anyway. He will go to Serbia, and he will then head to Dubai to play there, where he's signed in. And he then will play the clay court season, because he cannot play in Indian Wells. He cannot play in Miami. He said in one of the interviews he gave after the final, I'm hoping for good news on that front, but at present, he is unvaccinated against COVID-19, and you cannot enter America unless you are vaccinated. against COVID-19. So he is hoping for a change of policy there. I assume he doesn't mean he's hoping he accidentally trips and falls onto a vaccine. So what next for Novak Djokovic? A very brief hardcourt season and then a prolonged stint to prepare for the clay. Calvin, if you give Novak Djokovic like a month off to recover from the emotional and physical turmoil of the Australian Open and then sticking on clay, he's going to win the French Open, isn't he?
He'll be favourite. I say that he'll be favourite now. The clay's always an interesting one because you don't know. You know, you get a good read on it before it with sort of who does well in Monte Carlo, Rome, Madrid. Yeah. I mean, you forget that the world number one from last year, where he's just lost the world number one, he's coming back. And clay's his best surface as well. So I think I'd make Djokovic and Alcaraz maybe joint favourites, depending. And again, I'm loath to write off Nadal in Paris. It wouldn't surprise me if Nadal knows the end is coming and it's really close. It wouldn't surprise me if we don't see him again until Paris and he goes one last push. And he rests everything.
Yeah, he's announced he's got a 6 to 8 week layoff with this hip flexor injury. Now the maths on that means that he could, in theory, make even Indian Wells or more realistically Miami. My sort of educated guess is he won't play either of those, and that he'll actually just get fully fit and play Monte Carlo, Rome, and Paris. They're the three he prefers. To, not obviously he prefers to play Paris, but.
He does normally turn up to Madrid as well because it's obviously on home soil, so he will typically play that.
And did he play Barcelona? He played Barcelona last year.
He does often play Barcelona as well. I mean,
it's hard to see him playing 4 clay tournaments before Roland Garros.
I think it depends how well he does. I mean, we've seen in a few seasons recently where he's come back just for the clay and been pretty rusty. Years gone by, he'd come back and still just thump everyone and play, like 5 weeks of full, I'm winning every tournament here. Whereas actually the last few years, he's not done that well at Monte Carlo. He's not done as well at Barcelona. And he's kind of then started getting into his stride. He's not done well at Madrid in terms of winning it for a few years now. But he's normally in his stride by the time he gets to Rome, etc. It's hard to say. I think beyond that, though, I mean, it's an interesting time for Djokovic full stop because, after years of going on about can Serena catch Margaret Court, that felt like such a poignant moment in tennis history where everyone's desperate to have Margaret Court's name written out and you're thinking, God, if Serena doesn't do it, who's going to do it? I mean, Novak could blast through that. I mean, genuinely, I'd still have him down to win another 5 from here, which seems crazy compared to 2 years ago.
I was thinking just in terms of the conversation we were having before as to who could rival him, and we're sort of looking at everyone talking about Alcaraz. The wild card in all this could be is if Zverev gets his form back when he's fully fit, because Zverev is the one player over the last 2 years who seems to have who's as close to having Djokovic's number as anybody is.
This episode is sponsored by State Farm. Buying insurance can be complicated, and you might have a lot of questions, like, what if my policy doesn't cover that? Or, what if I need to make a claim in the middle of the night? Good news, State Farm is there for all your what-ifs. You can reach them 24/7, talk through any questions with your agent, and you can even file a claim on the State Farm mobile app. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Call or go to statefarm.com to get a quote today.
We are supported by Smartwool. Smartwool loves to make people feel comfortable with their merino wool socks, base layers, and more. All the best winter pastimes are made even better with a little extra comfort from Smartwool. They have gloves for making snowballs and for use as cold weather koozies, base layers for skiing, and for when you want to avoid real pants at home, and cozy socks that warm your toes on the coldest, snowiest days. Smartwool gear makes it all possible. That's because merino wool gives you the comfort to get out there no matter the temperature and experience more. Smartwool helps you feel good. Now it's up to you how far you will go. Start your next winter adventure with 15% off your first order at smartwool.com. SMARTWOOL.com. Tap the banner or visit this episode's page to shop now.
Welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. I've got George Bellshaw and Calvin Betton here, and they're going to help me wade through the mailbag as we answer your questions from Twitter. You can tweet us at UnfilteredTennis. You can also comment on our Instagram or DM us on Instagram, Tennis Unfiltered Pod, or you can email us, tennisunfiltered@gmail.com, and we will try being the operative word, and read out as many of your questions as possible. We'll start, I think, with... Oh, here we go. We'll start with Hanya. Match of the tournament, she asks, very simply. I actually think there aren't many candidates for this because, as we sort of alluded to earlier on the podcast, it's not been a classic from the tennis perspective. I'm going to go slightly left field and say Rublev-Rune, which was the fourth round. It was actually the last five-setter of the tournament. There were no deciding sets. Actually, I'll tell you a really good stat. There was only one deciding set match in the entirety of the men's and women's draw from the quarterfinals onwards, which was the women's final. No other match went down to a deciding set. So all straight sets of the women's, staggeringly. Rublev-Rune, fourth round. Rune had match points on the Rublev serve, two of them at 4-5, or was it 5-6? Anyway, in the final set, he then led 5-love in the tiebreak and, frankly, blew it. Which is why he didn't do as well in my player ratings, which is a new and innovative piece of content that I've done for the Australian Open, which I recommend you have a look at in the notes for this show. Calvin, I know it's not that new and innovative.
I got a new question about it, though. I had a look at them earlier. How come Djokovic and Sabalenka only got 9.5? What more
Because I couldn't give them
done?
10. I couldn't give... Well, for a start, Djokovic could have not dropped a set. And Sabalenka could have not dropped a set. They both dropped one set in the tournament.
Oh, come on. If you win the tournament, you've done the most you can do.
Perfection.
No, I'm with you, James. Yeah.
Perfection.
Only a 10 if you win. A 10 is if you win 6-love, 6-love, 6-love.
No, I'm not having that. I'm not having that
at all.
Well,
That's perfection.
For that kind of scoring, you deserve all the stick that you'll inevitably get from all the people with crocodiles in their bios.
Fortunately, most people with crocodiles in their bios have been muted at this point, which, if you've been giving me lots of abuse this week and I haven't bitten, it's probably because I've muted you into the void. Anyway, yeah, I'm going for Rublev-Rune for match of the tournament. George, who have you got?
I mean, the obvious answer is Murray Berrettini, I think.
Oh, no, that's not the obvious answer.
You think Kokkinakis?
Yeah. Murray Kokkinakis is the obvious answer.
Yeah.
That's what Calvin's going for, I guarantee you that.
Yeah.
But okay, well, apart from the Murray thrillers, the one I did find most absorbing actually was the women's final. I don't think it was necessarily the highest bar match, but I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was an interesting contest, and it was a match where I genuinely had no idea which way it was going to go. Which there are a few of those these days than I care to admit in the kind of biggest matches.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Calvin, are you going Murray Kokkinakis?
Yeah, I think you've got it. I mean, it was like that's the one we'll remember 2 years from now.
Yeah.
The Berrettini match was a bit strange. I think it was close. I don't know if it was a particularly good match. It was good at the end, but the two sets that Berrettini won, I think were not particularly great, interesting sets. Equally, to be fair, the first two sets of Murray Kokkinakis weren't that interesting either. There wasn't there were great matches in terms of drama, and I'm not far away from agreeing with George on the women's final, which I found interesting as well. Yeah. But again, none of these matches you would say they were great level. The level was great.
I thought the level of the women's final was good. I thought it wasn't like necessarily a good mesh of styles.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I watched. There was a few things going around since I've rejoined Instagram. Actually, I've followed a few like these old these sort of vintage tennis accounts, and they had a few last week doing the Agassi Sampras final or semi-final from I think 2001 or something like that. And that was one of the best matches I ever watched. And it had the highlights on it. And even the highlights now, the standard is just phenomenal. And then you remember that when you get two contrasting styles and they're both playing well and the crowd are into it, it really is fantastic sport, is tennis in those circumstances.
I've got. I just had a quick cast of my eye over the women's draw just to remind myself of matches that I might have forgotten. And a low-key, extremely low-key match of the tournament domination is Maria Sakkari against Diana Schneider. Diana Schneider's 18. She's at North Carolina State. She's Russian. She's left-handed. She qualified for the tournament. Made it to the second round, beating Kokova in the first round. And then went the distance with Sakkari. And honestly, I think Diana Schneider is one to watch. She's been mentioned a couple of times by a few people on Twitter that I follow that are very good at having their finger on the pulse at the lower levels, Damien Kunst being among them. And I really think she's got a bit of a chance of doing something quite special. Hits great angles, hits it hard, is a 3-time junior Grand Slam doubles champion, which is quite hard to do. I appreciate it's doubles, but anyway, just one to watch, and I think a match that maybe in 5 years' time, people will be coming back to this podcast and go, James Gray knew. He knew about Diana Schneider. I mean, in fairness, Juan Ignacio and Damien Kunst alerted me to her, but that was just my low-key effort. Thank you for the question, Hanya, on Twitter. This is actually a question I wanted to ask independently, so I'm delighted that Elena Tsourdi has... she's given us 2 questions. I think we'll only get to one, but this is what I want to ask people. What are your thoughts on Medvedev's lacklustre form? Game plan of absorbing power from the baseline being read by more opponents? ? When I was doing my player ratings, I sort of thought about this as well and had a bit of a chin stroke about Daniil Medvedev. Just to put it in context of what's happened to Daniil Medvedev from a statistical point of view, he made 3 finals in 5 attempts in Grand Slams. And since then, since his most recent final, i.e. Australia last year, he's gone 4th round, 3rd round. And the people who've beaten him are Cilic, Kyrgios and Korda. George, what on earth's happened to Daniil Medvedev?
I think me and Calvin are going to really disagree on this. And I'm going to have a very generous read of Medvedev, and Calvin's going to have a more scathing read. That's my prediction of this segment.
I love it when you signpost the podcast like this.
It's good. That's what I'm here for. It's help our listeners follow. I'm not as worried as other people probably are about Medvedev. I think Korda was playing bloody well this tournament. I think Kyrgios was playing bloody well at the US Open. I still think Medvedev reaches the final of this event if he dodges both of those events actually, if he dodges those 2 players in that half of the draw. That's my honest opinion. So I think there's a degree of wrong players, wrong time. And Calvin's going to be pulling a face saying I'm being way too generous there. So I'm not that worried. I don't think his form's where it was, but I still think he's playing okay enough tennis to still beat the majority of the tour. It's just he's fallen into some bad draws. I thought Korda was brilliant this way, and one of the things I was most disappointed about this tournament was not getting that Korda Tsitsipas semi-final, because I thought he had a really good chance of winning that match, and it would have tested Tsitsipas's level before we got to that final, which no one else in that half was going to do. And yeah, I thought this was going to be Korda's breakout, and even I'd have given him far more of a chance of beating Djokovic in the final than I would Tsitsipas, given the lack of scarring. So that's my generous take, and now Calvin can take you through the why Medvedev's finished.
Calvin, you've already been told what you're going to say, apparently.
He's not far off. I mean, I would be concerned if I were him. It does look like a lot of players have figured him out, and it's all right. George I do kind of agree with George that he came up with against two players playing well at the wrong time, but also they're not the best players in the world. Neither of them are top 10 players, and there's other guys who would also fancy their chances. There's other big hitters out there. Alcaraz is a huge hitter. I'm trying to think who else is in the top 10. Rune's a big hitter. Yeah, Zverev. Those guys, if they're back, and I think that's going to be his problem, that he tends not to do a lot. And also what I noticed this week and on the thing with Medvedev, as I did in a video a few years ago, which me and George did on him tactically, and we spoke at length about the length that he hits. And it wasn't. I watched him this week against Korda in that match, and it wasn't that great, his length. He's now making balls, but he's dropping length quite a lot. And you just wonder what he's going to add to his game that he doesn't have, that is going to get him past those players. I think his main concern is if the guy, and I said, to be fair, I said it in that video that we did, I think 3 years ago, this problem will come when if guys can just knock him off the court, if they can hit through him. I actually think he's probably got a better chance at beating. This may sound crazy, and this doesn't mean I would favour him to beat him. I think he's got a better chance of beating Djokovic than he's got against players like Kyrgios, Korda, Zverev on full form now, because they can blow him away, and he can't really counter that.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I guess as well as those two playing well, the other thing I was alluding to is that I think they're the worst style player for him to be playing.
There's quite a few Kyrgios of those around now, though, George, as well.
There are, yeah, and they are coming through. So, but equally, if you look at how this draw fell apart completely, if he dodged Korda and his injury came off, I think he beats Tsitsipas. I think he beats Khachanov. I think he beats Sinner. I genuinely would have had him still to reach the final. I think it's just like quite an unfortunate draw. But as I say, I'm probably being a bit generous there.
Don't know if he beats Sinner, And Tsitsipas beat him last time, and he always had Tsitsipas's number prior to that. He's beaten him the last couple of times, I think.
Third set tiebreak at Tour Finals, he beat him last time out. So, I mean, I wouldn't want to read too much into that, but
yeah,
he really had his number before that, though, George. I think
he did,
really sort of.
I mean,
he had the hex on him.
I'm not saying it's been good. I'm just saying I'm not looking at these results. I'm really, really, really worried about this guy not being like a strong force at the top end of the game. I think we've always said I don't see him winning more than like 3 or 4 majors as a max, and I'd still stick with that, and it wouldn't surprise me if that ended up being 2 or even stayed on 1. But yeah, I still think he'll be thereabouts top 5 player over the next year, would be my prediction.
I'll stress I probably went a bit hard there. I don't think he's done as a player. I think he might be done as, this is somebody who was world number 1 and one of the 2 favourites for slams. I see him being now kind of hovering around 8 or 9, 7, 8, 9. And I still think there's a chance that he might win another slam, but I think we might be looking at 1 or 2 rather than 3 or 4.
I'd put a beer with you on him finishing the year top 5. So I'll take that if you like.
Okay.
Oh, wow. And our first tennis unfiltered bet of the year. Put it on the list. Right, let's move on. Thank you, Elena Tsourdi, for your question on Twitter. Tim Mason, I'm sort of trying to unpick this question a little bit. Thoughts on how much of a locker room lift invincibility gives you, please, and what the pack can do to counteract it other than winning more? I mean, I suppose what he means is Novak Djokovic's psychological advantage over the locker room. And the fact that, yet again, I mean, you may have seen, Oleg K on Twitter. I actually don't know who he really is, but some people probably do know. But he tweeted players born in the 1980s versus players born in the 1990s in Grand Slam finals. And the answer is only one player born in the 1990s has beaten a player born in the 1980s in a Grand Slam final, and that's Daniil Medvedev of the US Open. All other clashes, of which I think there are 12, have resulted in the 1980s player winning. And that's defeats for the kind of players like Medvedev twice, Tsitsipas twice, Thiem 3 times, Raonic, Berrettini, Ruud, Kyrgios. Calvin, locker room lift for Djokovic, this kind of invincibility? Because he doesn't have much of an invincibility anymore. It has been broken, but he's still quite hard to beat.
I mean, he's got so much locker room power, hasn't he? But the best way to get it by winning. Like, you can do whatever you want. You can do absolutely anything you want if you're winning, but it's as close to invincibility as you can get without being invincible. But again, I think it comes down to belief. I think a lot of these players, they don't have the belief that they can beat him. Ironically, the 2 players who, I don't know if it's ironically or not, the 2 players who who do seem to beat him are the players who you think, like Alcaraz just thinks he can beat anybody. And so that's not a problem for him.
Well, yeah, I mean, it helps that he definitely can.
And Alexander Zverev's one of the most arrogant people you could ever come across. And so he seems to think that, like I say, he seems to think that he can beat him, especially on quicker courts. I think he thinks he can do that. Again, he seems to think. I think he seems to think he can beat Novak Djokovic more than he can consistently make second serves and volleys. I was actually thinking yesterday in our WhatsApp group when I referred. What did I call Tsitsipas' backhand? The worst defensive shot in the top 20, was it?
Sure.
And I
you
thought,
probably had 200 knowing you.
No, I thought, like, where does it sit in the worst shots in the top 100? And I'm thinking about compiling a ranking list. I mean, we know.
Oh, that's going to end well, isn't it?
We know. I mean, we know what shot I've got ranked number one, completely dominant in the sport. It's still Zverev's volleys.
Zverev volley.
But, okay, yeah, fine.
Djokovic smash.
Yeah, I was going to say Djokovic smash, but
Zverev's got two in the top 5, like without a doubt. Berrettini's backhand's not terrible. Everyone gives Berrettini's backhand some stick. He doesn't miss many of them. He slices it. His drive isn't great, but he rarely does it. His slice is actually effective, just not as good as his forehand and his serve. It's not a weakness, I don't think.
Just returning to the initial question, and thinking about a different player here, I think Swiatek's going to be quite an interesting example from this point about that invincibility point. We've had her down as, and I still think this at the minute, as the big dominant force in women's tennis. She had that huge run last year, and you kind of were at that point where, crikey, she's going to steamroll everything since. But since that run, she's only won one of the 3 slams that have come up. And I'm just, I'm not trying to push that she's suddenly going to drop off and it's going to be terrible, but you need to keep that run going at the biggest events to keep that air of invincibility. And that's what guys like Roger, Novak, who's the other one? Roger, Novak.
Rafa Nadal.
There he is.
Incredible brain fade there.
I'm tired. I think that's a challenge for Swiatek in terms of keeping that invincibility, and it'll be quite an interesting thing to see how we go, because she has only won 2 slams, despite, I think, we all think she's been comfortably the best player since Barty left the game. So that's quite an interesting flip on where that invincibility could chip away further.
That kind of leads us on nicely to another question. Another one from Elena, actually. So she's getting both of hers. I apologise if some people get none and she gets both. What does Swiatek need to do to change to be more competitive against big hitters and aggressive returners? She was beaten by Elena Rybakina in this tournament. Elena also mentions Sabalenka and Garcia. There clearly is, as we saw in the women's final, which we'll maybe use this as a segue into, a big hitting enclave that I hope become a bit more consistent in the women's game. And Swiatek does look a bit like redirecting that power is a weakness, doesn't she, George?
I still think she'll be really competitive with these guys. It's just that I think it's kind of a fact of life that, if you've got someone who can twat the ball incredibly hard and they have a day where they twat it incredibly hard consistently, that's really difficult to play against. And Rybakina and Sabalenka are 2 of those players who have all the weapons to blow a Swiatek off court. They really hit the ball incredibly hard, and when they're on it, incredibly well for long periods. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily like a major worry for Swiatek. It's good for the women's game if they do start being more consistent. It'd be great. I think it could be some really good potential matches regularly, trying to watch Swiatek get the better of these kind of huge hitting power players. There'd be a nice contrast in styles, but I still don't look at Swiatek's game and think, oh, I'm really worried about one aspect and there's a player she's really going to struggle against. It's just people who whack the ball really hard. If they have an on day, that's pretty tough to play against no matter who you are.
Calvin, I mean, how do you, if you're Swiatek's coach tomorrow and you look at the way she deals with those players, because she tends to be up on the baseline, she tends to be quite aggressive in that sense. What do you look at? How do you deal with someone who's always getting the first strike in?
I'm in total agreement with George. I don't think she does anything different. Her game is ideally built to beat those players, but there's an understanding that those type of players are just going to win matches every so often. It's just what's going to happen. And she also probably knows that those players are not all that consistent either. So she's probably, she's built a game whereby she'll beat these players probably two out of every 3 times that they play. And being that she doesn't naturally hit the ball as hard, as she's not as big as some of those girls, she's probably maxed out the best way of playing them. She's the one player who they won't want to play either. Because she can do so many things to throw them off their game. But sometimes they got, those girls are going to throw their racket at the ball, and they're going to hit some clean winners.
Let's move into the women's final, because we've not really touched on it yet, albeit it's been mentioned a few times. Aryna Sabalenka from a set down, winning 4-6, 6-3, 6-4. That's now the 7th match in a row in which Aryna Sabalenka has lost the first set in a Grand Slam and gone on to win the match, which is a pretty remarkable statistic. The first set, she hit 5 double faults. We thought this might be the old Aryna Sabalenka finally coming to party in the final. She only hit 1 more in the entire match, I believe, and that was on championship point, the first of 4. Eventually, she got over the line. She gave a very funny and quite tipsy press conference where she kept saying, "Oh, I'm being very silly. You all want me to get more drunk, don't you?" And she would then take a big glug of champagne. So it was quite good fun, really. And I do genuinely quite like her as a person, and it's nice to see her succeed. Unfortunately, this is the first year when I haven't started the season by saying, I think this is the year Aryna Sabalenka is going to win a slam, whereas I've done that every year for the last 4. So I'm disappointed because it makes me look like a bit of an idiot, but no one in this Sabalenka camp is disappointed with her 3-set victory. 2 hours, 28 minutes it was. People complain sometimes you don't get your money's worth on women's matches. You certainly did on this one. George, I think I know you enjoyed it. You mentioned it in your match of the tournament conversation. Stimulating, interesting, intriguing.
Yeah, they're 2 very good players. It was, I know Rybakina won Wimbledon, but new ground at this tournament. They've had kind of previous matches that Sabalenka had won all of them, but all kind of coin toss matches. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was good. As Calvin said, it wasn't necessarily... The 2 styles don't necessarily make for the greatest viewing per se, but they both played pretty good stuff a lot of the time, hit the ball bloody well, and on the whole, held their nerve both pretty well and kept it interesting. Maybe a little bit towards the end of the match that slightly fell away as the serious pressure came on, and I thought Rybakina actually didn't take advantage of the Sabalenka nerves at the end. If she'd, I know we've criticised Tsitsipas for not trying to be too safe against Djokovic, but actually in that moment, Rybakina put in a few loose balls when really just keeping Sabalenka going at that moment was probably not a bad play, given how some of the errors she was chucking in as well. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed it, and my hope is that Rybakina, for her, she will bring the consistency to the tour so we can start building more and more of a narrative around these things. But if she only turns up to the majors, that's no bad thing, given they're the biggest stages. And you have to hope that Sabalenka, who, to be fair, has been really consistent at tour level for a long time. This isn't a random breakthrough like there have been many times in the women's game in the last few years. This is someone who thoroughly deserves it based on how she turns up week in, week out. But her problem's been turning up at the majors. Now she's got that weight off her back, and you didn't really notice the weight at all there until the very last moments of that final. This is a great result for women's tennis, because this is someone who can be up there week in, week out and push Swiatek, which would be great news.
Calvin, your thoughts on the women's final? I mean, I know you enjoyed it more than you've enjoyed much more of the women's draw, to be fair.
Yeah, I enjoyed watching it. Had a lot of drama in it. The thing I found interesting was, although their styles, their game styles, were as similar as you could probably get, They're mentally and emotionally and how they carry themselves is completely different. Sabalenka, you could see was teetering on this sort of intensity and energy and nervous energy that she has, that she knows it's bubbling, and fair play to her that she controlled it, because she let it out there that it was simmering, the nerves and that kind of thing. They were right on the surface, whereas Rybakina was just kind of looked like she was just playing first round of a 250 the whole time. She misses and she kind of shrugs her shoulders, and can't be saying the same for a coach, to be fair. But
what do you make of that, Calvin? I mean, there's, just for a bit of context, Pam Shriver had some quite strong words to say about I think Stefan Vukov is his name, her Croatian coach, who is very animated in the box and sometimes not always positively. There's been quite significant blowback to Pam Shriver's complaints, saying Shriver said she didn't respect Rybakina, that Vukov didn't respect Rybakina as a coach. Rybakina herself came back on Instagram and defended him and said that he's been a big part of her success. Muratoglu and Dimitri Tursunov especially came out in defence of Vukov as well. I mean, Calvin, from what you saw of his animations and his input to the match, you're allowed to coach from the stands these days. Any red flags, or just sort of normal coaching but a certain style?
I mean, he gets emotional. I don't think there's anything necessarily on. I would like to think that I wouldn't be as negative as he is. I don't think that helps anybody. But other than that, there were no red flags in inverted commas from what I saw outside of just sort of coaching levels. I'd be more concerned with some of the talk about what's going on not out in the open.
Yeah.
And I think, it's a difficult one. It's a really difficult one, isn't it? I'd seen a few people today going, when Rybakina made her comment, she was like, that closes the issue. Then we don't have Pam Shriver doesn't have any context, and matters closed now. I don't think it's necessarily that. It's like what is Rybakina going to say? That's if I told you she'd released a statement, you could pretty much have said it would be word for word what she said. But yeah, in terms of what he was doing off the court, I'd certainly like to think that I'm not giving out those vibes.
Well, he's taken her to one Grand Slam title and one Grand Slam final, so results-wise, can't argue too much, but as Calvin rightly says, can't just dismiss things like that out of hand just because people say it's not happening. But we'll see. I'm sure we'll hear more about it as time goes on, and hell, when he wins WTA Coach of the Year, we'll probably have to ask some questions.
I'll say this. I think it's, and I'm not specifically talking about him. I think this thing where you get a lot of instances where players and coaches, they row, they don't get on, and it's highly charged. That's not the same as the coach not respecting the player. And I'm not saying in this instance that isn't the case, but I've seen it thrown around quite a bit recently. I think the coach should be more respectful of the player, but as we've seen with certain British players, the players are not always often very respectful of the coach at the same time, and different coaches approach it differently. Like to be honest, like Andre Medvedev and his coach, they have some pretty big rows mid-match.
Yeah.
And we don't go, this is just disrespectful to Medvedev. I think it's one of those, and I'm talking generally there, not about Rybakina's coach, because the things that are being said about him, if they are true, are pretty bad. But more, I think we should be careful of just going, the coach doesn't respect the player there. That's not. It's that is something that you need a bit of context on.
George,
Gilles Savara wouldn't last 5 minutes in Andy Murray's box, would he? I mean,
he just would leave.
He just storms off, doesn't he?
Inside the first 3 games.
Well, would he last 5 minutes in say Sabalenka's box? You wouldn't think so, would you? But Rybakina just seems to be one of those girls who's just gonna. I don't actually think it affects her, to be honest. She seems pretty much in control of what she's doing. I don't think it actually affects her too much.
Yeah, very even-handed. Right, let's get back to the mailbag while we still got time. One from Rick Marcinet, which I don't think is totally serious. What's more upsetting? Rybakina playing from the parking lot for her first few matches, Joker's rigged draw, Joker's fake injury, or the crazy preferential treatment Joker received by playing at night every match. Look, Elena Rybakina is going to get a much better court draw from now on because she's now a top 10 player and a 2-time Grand Slam finalist, as well as I know she won one of them. The draw isn't rigged, obviously. Or it is. I mean, just for the record, and they're very open about it, that's how seeding works. No, seriously, like, not only do they seed the draw...
FA Cup draw.
People also won't necessarily know that they rig which seeds get drawn into which slots. So the top seed never plays in the third round anyone seeded higher than 26, Calvin.
Also, in this tournament, who wouldn't have been a good draw for him?
Well, I mean, exactly.
Looking at it realistically, he's not going to get Tsitsipas before the semis and that kind of thing. So who would you say outside of, I guess outside of maybe Medvedev, Kyrgios wasn't in the tournament, who would you go, geez, that's a nightmare draw for Djokovic? You wouldn't, would you? You'd look at everyone in the draw and go, Djokovic's got a pretty comfortable draw there.
Yeah. Time is running out because George's partner has appeared in the background of shot, which is always... It's like the sun setting. It's a warning that time is catching up with us.
Only just got home from work, the poor thing. Quarter to 11.
Heaven forbid civil servants should do some late hours. I'm joking, obviously.
She's also not a civil servant.
I thought she was.
Before you slander us all.
Oh, she works in the private sector. That's why she's working late. Yeah, that's why you knock off at 5:30 every day. Right, Sinfo Rubelex. How much worse can the ATP get? I mean, if Djokovic retired tomorrow, I think we'd get some pretty rogue Grand Slam finals, wouldn't we?
I think, yeah, I'm in a bit of a funny place on this, on whether it's, Novak's just ludicrously good and we're judging a new generation against 3 ludicrously good people and they're always going to look a bit worse. But then Alcaraz, I feel like, is keeping the men's tour in fairly safe hands going forward. So I'm not that worried about it. I mean, if Alcaraz is out injured for the next 18 months and just keeps having these problems, then I'll maybe start to be a little bit concerned. But I think kind of end of Djokovic, start of Alcaraz is a pretty exciting place to be if we can get regular finals of that matchup. Like, I think that's a pretty exciting time for the tour. And you talk about how people remember Federer, Sampras in 2001, even though that wasn't exactly the changing of the guard, given he didn't win it at Wimbledon for another 2 years after. People look at that match and think, crikey, that was a really special match at slam level. And Alcaraz has come through quicker than Federer. And Djokovic doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. So that's potentially quite an exciting thing for this year if we can get those two playing each other in big matches at slams.
Calvin, the last question from the mailbag, scooping out from the bottom from Gohan. If Murray put Berrettini away in 3 sets, he presumably starts the Kokkinakis match with more energy and doesn't end up going to 5 sets. How far do you think he could have gone in the slam, especially given how his quarter of the draw collapsed?
Yeah, I think, the fatigue definitely played a part. I also think that Bautista Agut is just a nightmare for him anyway. Again, if he'd have got a different draw and some of the other players who were left in at that stage, I could see him have gone, certainly second week, last 16, maybe quarterfinals. I don't see who he'd have beaten in the quarterfinals, maybe other than Tommy Paul.
George, do you agree with that assessment, roughly?
I said if he beat Bautista Agut, I thought he'd reach the semis and then lose to Djokovic. So, I mean, obviously, fatigue aside. But yeah, it's easier said than done to just win these matches in 3 sets, isn't it? But I've said this before about Berrettini. I think he's got Berrettini's number completely, which is why it frustrates me that he always gets dragged into these super long ones. He should have beaten him at the US Open. He's beaten him this time, but I think when he actually puts his mind to it and starts thinking about how he should be playing the match, which Murray seems to sometimes not start doing until it's already 4 hours in, probably could see him off earlier, but that's probably a bit too simplistic a view.
I agree with George in a way, because Murray's always, if a player has a weakness, Murray exploits it as well as anybody does. And Berrettini, you know, I know I said earlier that Berrettini's backhand isn't a weakness, but it's comparatively it is. This was actually one of the tournaments where I don't think you can lay much blame on Murray. Like, sometimes you think he goes 5 sets because you go like, what on earth were you doing for 2 of those sets? This one, I think, was like legitimately, like, he went 5 sets Berrettini. You know, that's not. It's not like he's going, you know, 5 with who did he do that time? Was it James Duckworth?
Oh, and there's another one as well. Yeah. I can't remember. Yoshihito Nishioka.
Yeah. It's not the same as that. And then, to be fair, Kokkinakis played out of his skin for 2 sets. So that wasn't really Murray sort of dicking around and getting himself in a 5 set when he really shouldn't have done. I don't think this one could have been helped, to be fair.
All right, we are, as I say, rapidly running out of time. But Calvin, there was a winner at Les. I don't know whether it's called Les A or Les A. Les Petits A, maybe, is the correct French pronunciation.
That's the one.
13-year-old Mark Sieben, again a name I'm not sure how I'm pronouncing, who's British, who's the first British Les Petits A champion since 1998. Calvin, can you maybe just tell us what Les Petits A is and why it's such a big deal to win it?
So Le Petit A, he's actually Mike Chaban, I'm told, James. He's from Romanian descent.
Okay, cool.
So Le Petit A is basically recognised as the unofficial 14 and under World Championships. Right. Now, it's a weird one. It's the 14 under World Championships, but it's played at the start of the 14 and under year. So most players who are in it are actually still 13.
Okay.
Because they've still got a full year of 14s after that happens. Now it's so big because historically it was the success that it had. If you won it, there was a stage where I think at the stage when Matt Smith won it, who was the last player to win it in 1998, he was the first player that ever won it and didn't go top 100 in the world in men's. So it had this huge sort of exemplifier of success, this sort of predictor of success. Now, it's kind of faded a lot in the last 10 to 15 years, and it's not that now. I actually had a look at the winners last night when I saw that Mark had won it, and I mean, obviously the last 3 or 4 years you don't know yet because they haven't come through. They're still only 17, 18. But even prior to that, there's a lot of names now that haven't gone on to be successful and that kind of thing. There's some guys who you've seen kind of hanging around the 180 in the world and that kind of thing. And there's the odd one who comes through. Tiafoe won it. Andy Murray lost in the final. Nadal won it. Gasquet won it.
The GOAT won it, George. You'll be excited to know.
Yeah, that's another one. But I think what I found, though, James, it's funny you mentioned that because there are a lot of those kind of players, the guys who are really small, make a lot of balls, and you know that's tough to beat in 14 and unders. What it is, if anyone ever gets the chance to go, it's a great tournament to go. The whole town gets involved. They fill the stadium. It's probably I think they have 2 stadium courts there, and they fill them. There's probably 5,000 or 6,000 people watching by the finals. It's a really great atmosphere.
There we go. There's one for your January indoor tournament of the year. I think that is all we got time for. I'm delighted to be able to mention Mark. Congrats, Mark, by the way. I just started working with Justin Sherring as well, so maybe we'll have a chat with Justin about that. I think that's all we've got time for. Please do leave us a 5-star rating and a review with a cowboy hat emoji in it. If we get 5 of them, Calvin's going topless on the plane. No, he's actually going with a top. So please do that. And more importantly, please do come back next week.
Sports Social Podcast Network.